In this video, I'm going to show you the exact steps you can take to create balance as a medical student. This is the method that allows me to not study on the weekends, work out 4 times a week, try new recipes for dinner, and go snowboarding 13 days so far this season, all while still passing my medical school exams. Hey guys, if you're new to this channel, my name's Maggie. I'm 27 years old and I'm a first-year medical student at the University of Colorado. On this channel, I'm super passionate about sharing my journey of working towards the big lofty goals I have while still finding time for the things that make me happiest. So we talk about the good, the bad, and everything in between of what medical school is really like on this channel. If that sounds up your alley, then be sure to subscribe and follow along. All right, with that, let's get into it. So step 1 of creating your perfect study routine is define your goals. Your study routine is completely dependent on what your number 1 goal is for your first year of medical school. The number 1 goal I have for the first year of medical school is study enough to pass, then live my life. I've had this goal since before I started medical school. I was interviewing at the University of Vermont and these 2 girls were chatting with prospective students, and one of the girls said something along these lines, and ever since then, it just stuck. She was a 4th year going into plastic surgery, so I was like, if she can go into plastic surgery and have this mentality, then so can I, and I can still do whatever specialty that I end up wanting to do. It's important to note that I specifically picked a pass-fail school for this reason. I just know that if I went to a med school that had traditional grading, I wouldn't have the mentality of study enough to get straight C's and then live my life. My brain just doesn't work that way, and I know that I would be obsessed with getting A's and B's, aka I would probably study more than I do now. Regardless of what kind of grading system your school has though, I think it's essential to define your number 1 goal. A goal for one of my classmates, for example, could be to earn honors distinction our 3rd year of medical school, which means you have to rank in the top 25% of our class to get the honors distinction. So if this were my goal, even though technically, so the way that is calculated, 30% of our grades from first year goes into the calculation, 70% is from clinical rotations. But even though our first year counts for less, if that were my number 1 goal, I would do whatever I could to ensure that I'm going to reach that 2 years down the road, aka I would study more than I do now. Maybe that would mean study half days on weekends or study all weekend, the weekends before we have a final coming up. Step 2 is brainstorm your perfect week. And by the way, I created a PDF download that you can print out. Just use the link below and you can follow along with the exercises that I'm mentioning. So hope you enjoy that. All right, so the purpose of step 2 is to get a rough idea of how you want to structure your week. You want to ask yourself questions like, when do I study best? What are my non-negotiables as far as studying and when I want to end each day? And what are 1 to 3 small things that bring me joy and aren't med school related? So here's my progression of how I figured this out, especially in the beginning when I had nothing to go off of as far as how much should I study each day, what the heck is med school going to be like. So again, I went off of something that I heard other med students say, and that is treating med school like an 8 to 5 job. From there, I'm like, okay, med school is probably going to be a hard job. So instead of 40 hours a week, I'm thinking 50 hours a week. And a traditional job, you don't work on the weekends. So that means I'll have 10-hour days, Monday through Friday of med school. And by med school, I mean either in class, in lecture for med school, or studying for med school. Next, for my perfect week, I wanted to make sure that I was maximizing how effectively I was studying by studying at times when I do best. That for me is in the mornings. When I lived in Seattle, I woke up at 5 a.m. every day to work on It's Life by Maggie before I went to my day job as a nanny, and I thrived with that structure. Therefore, I decided that my 10-hour days would start at 5:30 a.m. You know, you need some time to wake up and eat breakfast and things. So in theory, I'd be done by 4:30 p.m. Now, some days we do have class till 5 p.m. and even early on, I was making Anki cards during lecture, which means it's really nice to immediately after lecture do the new Anki cards. So for some days, I'm going to be over that 10 hours, but it was fine because other days I'm going to be a little less than that 10 hours. And one non-negotiable that I created because of this was a hard cutoff at 6:30 p.m. when the chances of me being productive anyway are incredibly low. This hard cutoff was really helpful after days like Mondays when we have lecture from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And afterwards, your brain is so overwhelmed. I just want to crawl in a hole and make sense of it all. But the cutoff reminded me that there's a reason I study in the mornings. And if I just stop at 6:30, eat real food for dinner, hang out with George and Oakley, go to bed early, get sleep, and then study the next morning, it's going to be 10 times more productive anyway, and I'm gonna be happier. Okay, the last thing for brainstorming your perfect week is writing down 1 to 3 small things that bring you joy day to day, because living for the weekend is no fun. So those things for me are getting back into CrossFit, taking my dog Oakley to the soccer field where she gets to run and play, be happy, and it makes me happy, and trying new recipes for dinner. Recently found Half Baked Harvest, and oh my gosh, so fun to cook new recipes from her. So think of things for you maybe similar. Maybe you like to journal, read, have a hobby, but think of things you can incorporate into a morning or night routine that you love. Like truly, my perfect day ends with getting home from class, going to the gym, picking up Oakley, going to the soccer field, and then cooking a new recipe, going to bed. Like that's how I incorporate things that I love every day instead of just on the weekends. But I think it's important to list those things so you can schedule it in and actually have a time blocked out that you'll actually do it. Step 3 is to time block your week in detail. This is where that rough brainstorm of your perfect week gets turned into reality. I prefer to use Google Calendar, but you can use whatever weekly planner that you like. So what I like to do, the reason I have 2 things pulled up is because on the right, I can see what's my have-tos. I have to go to class for 8 hours on Wednesdays. There's no getting around it, unfortunately. Actually, some Wednesdays it's shorter, but that's not consistent. Like typically, Wednesdays are 8 hours. I can't skip any of this. Anything that's in orange, that's only 50% required, so you better bet on skipping as much lecture as possible because I just prefer and study better watching lecture recordings. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is add the have-tos into my Google Calendar, and I've imported I can import my med school schedule too, but like I said, like this isn't what I plan to attend. I'm gonna only put in my calendar what I actually plan to go to or have to go to. All right, so this is my have-to schedule, including the classes that I have to go to 100%, and then I have to go to some of the orange, and I prefer to do it in the afternoons. Reason being, if I were to not go to this, I wouldn't be able to watch the full recording before this 3 p.m. lecture, which means at 5 p.m. I would be able to watch the recording, but then, you know, that's getting into later in the evening. I don't want to study. I'd rather go to the gym after this class. Or I could do it the next morning, but I don't want to do that either. So I go to the orange classes in the afternoons, even though I don't have to, and I pick to skip the Monday and Tuesday mornings because I love the bigger chunk of studying I can do in the mornings at home is just what works best for me. So this is my have to schedule, and then we have a weekly exam on Fridays. Next, I'm gonna add in when I want to study. Things that I study include Anki every day. I have to watch the lecture recording since I'm not going in person. And I'm actually planning for this block that's upcoming, Mind and Behavior. And after this 3-week block, I have an anatomy practical, so I'm gonna incorporate that as well. And this is where we go back to before when we determine when do we study best, what's our perfect study routine. Because we have a lot, like we could study in these times, we could study in these times, we could just like study all day Tuesday. I don't know, you have a lot of options here after you add in the have-tos and you think about what works best for you. So I'm gonna do that now for me and we'll see where we're at after that. All right guys, here is my study routine. I've also added in the things we talked about, things that make me happy, my little night routine because it's already here. I've been doing this a while. Your study routine will get better and better over time. For example, I'm always making small tweaks and improvements after assessing how a block goes. For example, I have for the longest time been doing pre-work on Friday afternoons, and that was my way to not study on the weekends because I would just get it all done and then not have to worry about it Saturday, Sunday. Well, MSK block, our most recent block, the pre-work either wasn't good and I didn't want to do it in the first place, or I didn't have the motivation to do it, so I just saved it for Monday morning. So now I'm just planning to do it on Monday mornings. Another thing we talked about was my anatomy practical coming up. So the 2 options we have when the TAs are there to help us is Thursday mornings or Friday afternoons, but Fridays, it's a madhouse. So I'm hoping Thursday afternoons, it's closer to the practical, so it might get busier, but usually it's like you and the TA, and it's the best time to go. So I'm gonna do that over the next 3 weeks. For these white spaces, some I kept as white spaces, and then I also kind of planned out when I wanna work on It's Life by Maggie, YouTube, Instagram. I've tried this a couple times, and ideally I would like to make my thumbnails on Fridays, not Sunday mornings right before videos come out. Hasn't actually happened yet. Maybe this block will be that block. So not all these big white spaces I kept, but like Tuesdays are more actually kind of wild card. Like maybe I'll want to study more, maybe I'll work on It's Life by Maggie, maybe I'll do nothing. And these white spaces I kept on purpose because maybe I want to sit on the couch and watch Netflix before docs starts kind of thing. Or do random tasks. I don't like to have every single minute planned. And even this, I don't follow this to the T. It's just nice to see that I have time to fit in all these things. And then from there, I'll do some, whatever I'm feeling like. Like I said, going to the gym, I average 4 days a week. Obviously you can see that I schedule 5 days a week, but like there's bound to be days where I come home and I just don't feel like going to the gym, or I don't like the workout that's programmed for that day. And lastly, I know everybody is like, how many hours a week do you study or do you spend on med school? I calculated, and if my calculations are correct, this ends up being just under 40 hours a week. So like I said, like at first you don't know what to expect. I planned for 50 hours a week roughly, and that hard cutoff at 6:30. But now if I'm having a really productive week and I follow this fairly well, I'm spending about 40 hours a week on med school, which is still fairly similar to what I expected, is like treating med school like an 8-to-5 job. Mine just starts a little earlier than most jobs. So that is my study routine. Hopefully it's pretty insightful to see all that. One last thing, also, when you're adding in your must-have or your have-tos, don't just think about lectures you have to go to. You also have to be like, okay, when am I gonna eat lunch? When am I gonna eat breakfast? Otherwise, you're gonna just plan when to study, and then you're gonna be like, oh, I never study at the right times because like I had to eat, or like I had to cook a meal that I like didn't schedule for. So one, that's where the white spaces come in. It gives you a little leeway, but then also like I plan when I'm gonna eat lunch and when I'm breakfast and when I'm gonna like sit on my iPad and like plan out my day kind of thing. So let's discuss my top 4 tips for actually making your study routine stick. Just because you put it in a Google Calendar and you picked out cute colors doesn't mean you're actually going to do the things that you plan. My first tip is to study high yield topics. This helps when you're sitting down to study for 2 hours to actually just study for 2 hours instead of 6. 2 ways to do that. One, if the lecturer emphasizes something by winking, pounding on the desk, and stomping their foot and saying it 3 times over, that's obviously a high yield topic that's definitely going to show up on a quiz or an exam. Versus you might have a lecture, well, that gives you nothing. They're going deep into the weeds. They're telling you subtypes of types and you don't know what to study. In that case, look at your learning objectives, which I think is common for most med schools. For example, we had a skin cancer lecture 2 weeks ago, and he was going into common variants of basal cell carcinoma, nodular, infiltrative, desmoplastic, and they have little asterisks by them saying they're more aggressive subtypes. And I'm like, do I need to know the more aggressive subtypes? Holy moly. But we have the LO related to basal cell carcinoma says this: recognize common types of skin cancer, including basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and melanoma. Therefore, and none of the other LOs for that lecture talked about subtypes. So did I study those subtypes? Absolutely not. So those are 2 really, really good ways to make sure that you're studying high yield topics and not going over the allotted time that you've given yourself to study. Number 2 is audit your day. This is so helpful for me. So when I mentioned that I sit down and brain dump and plan my day in my planner first thing in the morning, then what I'll do throughout the day is actually be like, okay, did I finish Anki at 6:45? Oh, I finished it at 8:30. Why? I'll put, I finished Anki at 8:30 because I was scrolling on Instagram, or because I slept in today, or because I just needed to have extra time. I didn't plan enough and I need more time to do Anki. So that's really, really helpful for over time improving your study routine, is auditing your day, see where you are wasting time, see where you can save time, things like that. Number 3 is change your environment when it's time to focus. I can't tell you why, but when I turn 90 degrees in my chair, get on my laptop instead of my iMac, and put on my headphones, I can get in focus mode. And sometimes when I'm really struggling and I've been trying to study and it's just not working for some reason, I will make those adjustments and all of a sudden I can focus really well. And lastly is to batch tasks and meal prep. I think meal prepping technically counts as batching. The only thing I consistently meal prep is boiled eggs. Sunday, I can take 20 minutes to boil 10 eggs so that when I wake up, I don't have to cook my breakfast. I just wake up, heat up my boiled eggs, and have that for breakfast. And it just saves a ton of time to not like get out the pan and make my eggs and then do the dishes and then want to clean the rest of the apartment. So all the things that I batch are kind of related to groceries and food. An amazing thing that George and I do is we don't grocery shop through the week. If we do, it's because we're like, we slacked a little, or we messed up something, or King Soopers didn't have what we ordered on Sunday. So every Sunday we sit down, even like when we're snowboarding, we'll do this in the car ride on the way back from the mountain. And we can do it on our phone because we do the pickup order, and we'll plan out first, like, okay, what do we want to eat for dinners? We always have 2 nights of the same dinner. So if we cook on Monday, we don't have to cook Tuesday, we eat leftovers. Then Wednesday we cook, and then Thursday we have leftovers. So that helps not have to order as much or think of as many recipes. And then we'll just pull up the ingredients we need, add it to the cart, schedule it for pickup, and we have groceries for the whole week, which means I can spend my evenings doing the things that make me happy versus going to the grocery store and trying to think of something for dinner. Now that you know how I've created my perfect study routine and don't study on the weekends, if you want to see it in action, I highly recommend one of my recent vlogs where I had a really productive week, and it paid off when I had our end of week quiz. I was super happy with my score, so happy with my week, and not every week's like that. If you want to see a week where my life's a mess, but I still made it anyway, then watch one of those vlogs. And that wraps up this week's video. I hope you enjoyed and can't wait to see you in the next one.